Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks, where every word matters. And a week has passed since Georgians cast their votes in the parliamentary elections, officially won by the ruling Georgian Dream party. However, the result of the election is highly contested by the opposition and Western observers. Now, is this the end of Georgia's European ambitions, or will the country witness soon a snap election? Well, to discuss it, we're joined by our guest, Tinatin Japaridze, geopolitical risk analyst at Eurasia Group. Good evening.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It is a pleasure to have you with us. So the electoral body in Georgia, the Electoral Commission, is to recount the votes after allegations of irregularities. Now, do you expect any major changes in the outcome of the vote?
Well, unless we see an international and a truly independent investigation, I don't anticipate seeing any different sort of an outcome from the Central Election Commission, just bearing in mind that they are, of course, working under very close control of the Georgian Dream, the ruling party. So unfortunately, in terms of waiting for something extraordinary to happen as a result of the current investigation that the CEC is conducting, I am a bit skeptical, but it remains to be seen whether there will be a stronger Western response and hopefully some sort of a Western backing, if not a direct involvement in supporting Georgians to revisit the highly contested results and hopefully show a truer, a more realistic picture of what actually happened on the day that the Georgians went to cast their votes on October 26th.
Yeah, but how would it happen? I mean, what are the possible scenarios for now? Now, do you imagine some Western politicians now going to Georgia to urge the government to recount the votes?
Well, I'm very skeptical that the West can get directly involved, but the hope, at least among the opposition coalition leaders, is that there will be Western observers that will get involved in the process, and hopefully the European Union, less so the United States. Of course, the U.S. has much bigger fish to fry at the moment with the upcoming U.S. elections and the aftermath, which I'm sure will be contested as well. So that remains to be seen how much the U.S. can get involved in this process, but at least the Georgian opposition is hoping to have some sort of Western backing and a stronger Western response, which once again, I'm not so sure that the sort of result and the sort of even response that the Georgian opposition hopes to get from the West is going to be doable at the moment, because in order to do that, the West would need two things. One is they would need to see a strong, unified, mobilized movement among the protesters, which unfortunately at the moment I'm not seeing right now. I'm in Tbilisi. We are anticipating another protest similar to the one that we saw on Monday, next Monday as well. But again, I don't think that that is going to be enough in terms of the momentum. And then second, they in the West, that is, would have to be willing to kiss goodbye to Georgia, whether Georgia is under the Georgian Dream or under the opposition coalitions. And that is just a gamble that I'm not entirely sure at the moment that the West is going to be willing to play in terms of a wild card that they would have to really have in their hands for them to be convinced that they would be able to see a drastically different result. Because I am not convinced that the Georgian Dream would not be able to rig the election results again. And if that were to happen, if we were to see a snap election and the Georgian Dream winning again through manipulation, falsification, and also some very significant.
Now, how real is this possibility of snap election in Georgia?
At the moment, I'm not seeing anything realistic that would enable me to say that it's going to happen. But at the same time, the opposition has to continue saying that they do believe that snap elections can happen, because the alternative is losing their support base. And the support base is currently very deflated.
Mm-hmm. Deflated, you say, but what is the scale of voting irregularities we're talking here?
Well, I haven't seen it myself firsthand beyond what's already available online in terms of bits and pieces here and there. But I think it's not just the scale, which I do believe that the investigation would reveal was quite significant, but also the variety of tools that the Georgian Dream used. I'm certain not without Russia's support and Russia's, I would say, at the very least, expertise, because obviously Russia has been in this business for quite a while. And we saw something similar in Belarus as well. And in many ways, I think that it's not so much the scale, but the variety of mechanisms that were used in order to rig the election, but also other hybrid means and this anti-war rhetoric that the Georgian Dream was using really worked.
The anti-war rhetoric, and I'm wondering whether this sort of narrative really appealed to people, because,
yes,
well, obviously some Georgians voted for the ruling party. So I'm wondering whether this fear of a military conflict in Georgia could have swayed people to in fact vote for the Georgian Dream.
I think many people did vote for peace versus necessarily voting for the Georgian Dream. The anti-Western rhetoric, I think, hurt them a great deal. I do believe that they went way too far for the liking of many of their supporters, not the diehard supporters. The diehard supporters in Georgia of the Georgian Dream are very similar to the diehard Trump supporters. There's nothing Trump can do that's wrong, right? They will always find a way to make it look like, he either had no other choice or he is doing right by the country. Very similar to the sentiment that I'm seeing and hearing among the diehard Georgian Dream supporters. But there are those who had been supporting the Georgian Dream, but once this anti-Western pivot started to become very real and a very real concern, they started to think twice about whether or not they want to vote for the Georgian Dream again, until the Georgian Dream found that tool. And the tool was the anti-war narrative that started to do extremely well, including, I believe, among some of the undecided voters that said, I may not love the Georgian Dream for another 12 years, but guess what? I do not want to see war in my own country.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, some analysts have already stated that Georgia will soon become a second Belarus. That is a close satellite for the Kremlin. Now, I'm wondering, how is it possible in a country that has been invaded by Russia not that long ago?
It will be very difficult for the Georgian Dream to become explicitly pro-Russian, which is why you've noticed that you're not really seeing pro-Russian Georgian Dream narratives and statements as much. They're being very cautious because they fully understand that the war, the 2008 war that you just mentioned, is still very much alive in the memory of many Georgians. They've either experienced it firsthand or they've heard all about it in terms of the younger generation from their parents. So in that respect, I don't think that being explicitly pro-Russian will actually serve the Georgian Dream. They have to continue selling this multipolar or a multifaceted foreign policy that does actually appeal to some Georgians who understand that they are living, geographically speaking, in a very complicated neighborhood. And to a degree, they do buy the Georgian Dream's statements and also their narrative of, we are doing this because we want to maintain peace in the country, given our complicated neighborhood. The issue is, though, once they started making very anti-Western statements, and that very abrupt shift, the pivot away from the West and toward the only other place that they could pivot, and that was toward Russia, that started to become a major problem, because many Georgians do know that Bidzina Ivanishvili, who was the founder of the Georgian Dream and also remains its de facto leader, he does maintain very strong ties to Moscow, and his wealth, after all, his fortune was made in Russia.
Now, enough about the ruling party. Now, what becomes of the highly divided opposition? Because, as you said, it's hard for the opposition to come up with a common idea for the future of the country, and I guess now the momentum is gone. So what will happen with the opposition now?
I think the opposition is now heavily relying on the youth that they hope will continue to protest. I'm a little bit skeptical, just because, as you mentioned, I do think that the momentum is gone a little bit. It's certainly not what it was in the late spring in response to the foreign agent law. And then the second hope for the opposition is a stronger Western response and some punitive measures, and this continued reluctance on the Western part to essentially declare the election result as legitimate. But realistically speaking, how much longer can the country stay in this limbo? I do not know, because there comes a time when actually devoting that energy to continuing to strengthen the opposition, to continuing to come up with some sort of a unifying message that will keep people engaged and bring them together and not lose hope entirely in Georgia as a democratic country and a democratic future, may actually be more important than fighting this fight that I do understand, of course, why the opposition has to continue contesting the election results, and they need to hold the investigation and they need Western support. I get that. But as devil's advocate, is that really going to be helpful? Because at some point it may actually strengthen the Georgian Dream, which, by the way, is not as strong as it was 2-3 years ago either. So perhaps thinking about this strategy and planning something that will be actionable over the next months and years may make more sense than trying to regain the momentum that I believe, at least as of right now, as of Saturday evening, I'm not seeing that momentum in the streets of Tbilisi. Perhaps something will change, but at the moment, I'm a little bit skeptical.
Is there someone to form a broad opposition movement around in Georgia? Well, obviously, President Zurabishvili is not such a person for all the opposition supporters. So, in your opinion, is there someone to cement the opposition?
The short answer, unfortunately, is no. And I think that is one of the reasons why there were so many people in Georgia, including those who absolutely did not want to vote for the Georgian Dream up until the very, very last minute. I was having conversations with average Georgians and asking them, who are you going to vote for? And they were struggling to even figure out which of the 4 opposition coalitions was going to be the right fit for them. I do understand that the United National Movement, former President Saakashvili's party that he once founded, had been so divisive and so problematic for the opposition that they had to distance themselves and form another coalition. But I do think that they may have gone a little too far for a country that is quite small to have 4 different opposition coalitions and expect for people to be able to figure out exactly which of the coalitions was going to be the right fit for them. It was asking a lot of people. And one more thing that I will mention as a shortcoming on the opposition's part, if we put aside the very obvious and very brazen election rigging on behalf of the Georgian Dream and probably on behalf of Moscow, the opposition did not necessarily have a message that appealed to all Georgians across the board. I think their message was very powerful for those in Tbilisi and a few other major cities in the country. But when it came to the bread and butter day-to-day problems that most Georgians are concerned about, as much as you and I care about Georgia's European future and democratic values, unfortunately, and quite understandably, an average Georgian who is worried about having enough money to be able to buy a loaf of bread for their child tomorrow may not have been so worried about potentially losing the visa-free travel opportunity to EU countries and EU capitals. And instead, they were worried about the day-to-day concerns. And I do think that the Georgian Dream in that respect was actually able to tap into that rural community of voters rather comfortably, which is why we saw them do, even with rigged results, they did far better in the rural parts of the country rather than in the major cities like Tbilisi and Kutaisi, where they lost.
So in the end, we must say one more time that the main strength of the Georgian Dream Party is the weakness of its opposition. Tinatin Japaridze, geopolitical risk analyst for Eurasia Group, was a guest this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching, and of course stay with us for much more here on TVP World.